Welcome to this month's Power Hour. I'm Ryan Kooiman, Director of Training.
I'm Chris Jongsma.
Chris is one of our content training developers here. And today's topic is service information. This is a vital piece that every shop should have figured out by now, but I'm still really blown away at how often people call and ask questions, which we're happy to answer. But where'd you look this up? I Googled it, I couldn't find it. And so really, I think in our experience, we found that service information is a must-have, and quite often many sources of service information is a must-have, right?
Exactly, for sure.
So in this next half hour, we're going to be talking about service information, a few different places to look for it, and a few different sources. We've definitely got our favorites, or the ones we're most familiar with, just because of personal history. But we're going to walk through them all and share some tips with you here today.
Okay, so now I've slid behind the screen. You're not going to have to look at my face here, but we're going to start out by looking at one of the aftermarket sources I'm most familiar with, being AllData. Now there's also Mitchell, there's TechMetric, there's all kinds of different sources out there. This is just one that I've kind of grown up with and really stayed in touch with or familiar with. And I remember back in my days as a technician, we'd go from Mitchell to AllData or vice versa a couple times. And it's difficult, but a lot of it just comes down to the navigation and finding out where things are. So using this, I'm just going to refer to a couple recent conversations with some friends or technicians in the recent past. And so one of them was somebody working on a 2021 Lincoln Aviator, and this is a plug-in hybrid vehicle. And so the question was how to disable it before starting the work on it. So let's go, and obviously we're going to build the vehicle first. So I will scroll through, and we get down to Lincoln truck, and it's an Aviator all-wheel drive. And now it gives us two different options for the powertrain here. As mentioned, this is a plug-in hybrid vehicle. So we select that. And now you can see we've got a lot of information here on the screen. So starting on the left side, we've got diagnostic trouble codes, service tables, TSBs, diagrams, specifications, parts and labor, maintenance. And one of the first things I want to say here is there's multiple paths to get to the same thing. And that's why I want to run through and show how I find something. Chris might run through the same thing and show how he finds the same thing as well. So that's one interesting thing about service information. There's multiple paths to get there. But because this is a purpose-driven research, let's take a look here. So in the middle of the screen here, we can see high voltage system, disable, enable EV or HEV, high voltage system, disable, enable hybrid, and hybrid electric drive system. So sometimes we might have to kind of search to find what we're looking for, and they might actually all take us all to the same place here. So let's just click on the first one there, and that only gives us parts and labor. So that's going to be what it takes to actually deactivate and power the system down. Okay, well, that doesn't help us a whole lot. I want to know how to actually do it. So I'll click on it again. All right, we've got procedures, but we've also got a TSB, or excuse me, technical safety information. So I'm assuming that's going to tell us all the precautions to take. Always good information to read up on. But so now here we've got connector, disconnect, and connections. So I'm going to tell you right now, that's going to be everything that's on the high voltage system here, such as the AC compressor, inverter, etc. That's going to show the connectors on all those and how to carefully disconnect each of them and reconnect them. That's one thing I'm starting to see a lot of on electric vehicles or plug-in hybrid vehicles is technicians damaging the electrical connector. And today it requires a complete harness replacement. There's going to be a lot of opportunity for additional changes in the near future here, but we want to make sure that we're disconnecting and connecting these properly. What we're looking for here is high voltage system de-energizing. Now, if you're familiar with a Toyota Prius, that's what most technicians are. When it comes to high voltage systems, you're going to be looking for a big orange plug. Well, that's not necessarily the case here on this Lincoln. And so we see the information here. scroll through. There's a manual depower process only to be used in a Ford specific diagnostic tool is not available or when the procedure fails. So if we look at it here, there's a low voltage connector located underneath the hood of the vehicle. And so we can look at the procedure to do this here. So that's one way of finding it there. Go back to the vehicle information here. Now, if I click on hybrid and electric drive systems, now we can find out much more of the system here. We can find out all the different components. You know, let's say we're going to have to go in and replace the battery. So we can click on that. Now we can find all the different components here listed. Hot links, we can connect to them. If you look on the side here, there's an R that shows us or indicates that there's repair information. If there's parts and labor information, that'd be in the next column. If there's a specific TSB, be in the next column, or a specification, that'd be in the following column. So if I back up and let's try and see, here's another example where it's got just the parts. Most cases, you're going to find them merged together, but because this is a newer vehicle, I'm assuming it was just entered in this way here. That reminds me of one additional tip. And so I don't want to be married to one service information source. Again, sometimes we got to go to the OEs as mentioned in the introduction there. So I'm going to share one of my favorites with you here. This is motorcraftservice.com. motorcraftservice.com. Now you can create an account here. You can go in, you can do a lot of stuff there. But if you go down to the bottom here and you'll see site features, download software, calibration files. This is where if you've got the tool or you're doing module programming, you're going to find the files there for that. Let's say you've replaced a module. And in the Ford world, you need to know the module as built data. And so if the previous module was bricked, you were unable to pull the information out of it, this is where you're going to go in and you're going to obtain the as-built data, diagnostic tool support, etc. But this is one of my favorites right here, free resources. So as I click on free resources, I can find OBD2 theory and operation for different makes and models of these Ford vehicles, owner information, instruction sheets, CD or paper manuals, rescue cards, quick guides, and information about tools and equipment here. So let's click on quick guides. And now you can find reference guides, towing and loading information for the different vehicles, module as-built data, latest calibration. You know, if you're not sure about, does this vehicle have the latest one? Information about the TPMS systems and bodybuilder website. This isn't going to take you to Muscle Fitness 101 or whatever. It's if somebody's upfitting the vehicle, they're going to put a work service body on it. This is where you're going to go to find out more information on that. So let's click on reference guides here. And now we will select the year and model. So this is a Ford site, but obviously Lincoln's a Ford product. So I'm going to select Aviator, find my vehicle. Now there's a modifiers guide, hybrid and plug-in emergency response guide. And this is one of the cool things that Ford does for all their electric vehicles here. They've got the emergency responders guide. And so this is a free resource. I paid nothing here. I don't have a subscription. I'm not even giving them my name or information. And I can scroll through and find out a ton of information about the high voltage system on this vehicle. See all the different components here, how they're laid out, how they work. I can also find out how to deactivate and take care of it here. So a lot of great information here for free on motorcraftservice.com. So let's go back to all data here and look a little bit further. So we've seen some information here, but I'm going to click in the upper left and change vehicles. Now, going back to some recent conversations with some friends here. Recently, a friend texted me and said, hey, I've got this 2023 Silverado and I'm replacing the front axle. This thing was in an accident, and so he had to replace the front carrier assembly, basically. What are some of the torque specifications on that? He wants to do it right. And so that's where we can come here. If we look on the left-hand side, you see specifications. So I could go into front axle carrier information, but by going to specifications here, now I will select mechanical specifications. And we're going to get down to, I believe it's probably going to be in the axle shaft assembly. And so this is one of the questions he was asking, how do I torque those bolts? Or what's the specification on that? So we can see an image here of where the bolts are, and then it actually shows us the torque specification here being 74 foot-pounds. Now you'll notice I'm scrolling here left and right with my mouse. For some reason on some of these newer ones, a little bit of it's hidden on the right-hand side there. It also shows us what the wheel lug nut should be on that particular one. So if I go back out, now you'll notice I referred to that in foot-pounds of torque. That's what I'm familiar with, but also there's other specifications given there. Now, if I go up to the top here, and you'll see on the top where it's change the vehicle, I can select library. I can also convert and repair reference. If I hit convert, this is a super helpful tool. I don't care if I'm helping my kids with the math homework, or I'm even trying to figure out paving my driveway. This is a very helpful conversion chart here. So you can type in a number and notice how it updated everything right there. So if I want to know how many feet are in a mile, whoops, there we go. 5,280 feet. And so it's a nice chart here. Reference, volume, weight, torque specifications, going from foot-pounds to inch-pounds, etc. So back to the vehicle here. Now, let's say that the check engine light's on, and this is one of my favorite features that I always recommend, and I'm still very frustrated by lack of seeing technicians do this. But let's say the check engine light's on. Let's go something simple like a P0101. Now, granted, in today's vehicles, we don't see a whole lot of P0 codes because there's so many new trouble codes written. We're quite often going to see a manufacturer-specific code written there. But this is what I want to drive home to everybody. It's so important to understand the code descriptor here. So this is a 101 mass airflow sensor performance. It's not a low voltage, it's not a high voltage code. There's separate codes for those, which are going to be related to the circuit or the voltage here. This is a performance code. And so if we look here, I love this. We can see the three different terminals here and what would happen if it was shorted to ground, open or high resistance, or shorted to voltage here. Gives some scan tool information here. Circuit system description. Good information to know. Don't forget, sometimes you got to scroll to get all the information here. But what I want to see the most here, what are the conditions for running the DTC? I can tell you many times when I was working in the shop or even talking to other technicians, especially when it comes down to evap emissions code. Oh, I've got this large leak code, but I can't find a leak. Well, what are the conditions for running it? And then they look at the criteria and go, oh yeah, it's 3 degrees outside, so the monitor's not going to run. Or the fuel tank's full, it's not going to run the monitor. This is what, if we're going to test this, we have to make sure that all the conditions are proper to replicate the conditions for setting the trouble code. And then how's that trouble code going to set here? And so the ratio between the measured and estimated airflow is too low. So the GM software engineers are very smart. They program into the control module by looking at other stuff such as throttle position, engine RPM. Maybe it's even got a map sensor somewhere on it. And it's going to determine at that condition what the mass airflow reading should be. It's going to use it kind of like a double check here. And if it's setting this code, it means that ratio between the estimated and what was real, was truly measured there, is different. and for greater than 1 second. So this isn't one of those quick, 2/10 of a second or 3 milliseconds code. This is for greater than 1 second. It's a long time in monitoring conditions. What happens when that sets? Well, the basically check engine light's going to come on. We're going to see some other code set it into a diagnostic limp in or a fail-safe mode, if you will. This one doesn't necessarily do that. But then we've also got some diagnostic aids here. And so it's going to give us a couple different tips here. Hey, what about the EGR valve? Could that be open or closed too long? That's going to affect the operation or the readings of the mass airflow sensor if the valve is open and recycling air rather than drawing fresh air in past the mass airflow sensor there. And so some more good information there. We've got just a ton more hot links here, and that's going to give a complete procedure. Now, I'm not always a big fan of following through the procedure, but sometimes it's very helpful to use. And there's a lot of great information here. So you can see, just for a good old P0101, a lot of information here. So I'll scroll back to the top here. Now let's say we're going to go ahead and replace the mass airflow sensor. Well, it's pretty straightforward, right? But maybe there's a relearn or something that has to be done. So you're going to find your engine management stuff under powertrain management. Now it might be under multiples of these here. So we've got computers and control systems, fuel delivery and air induction, emissions control system. We've also got sensors and switches. So I'll click on that. Mass airflow was not under that one. Let's try under, there we go. So sometimes you have to click on a couple different ones here. So there's the removal and replacement information. So now install. And so one of the things I'm always looking for here, is there a reset procedure? Now, sometimes with the mass airflow, it's actually called in the GM world a weather station. And so there is going to be additional stuff that you have to do here. And so it's always nice to look this up. Again, I get a lot of phone calls or conversations with technicians of I installed the part 3 times and still didn't fix it. Well, was there a relearn procedure that had to be done afterwards or clear out adaptive memories, something like that? On this particular one, there's not. So I'm going to click on vehicle, bring me back to the home page here, and we see just kind of all the information here again. Now, this is a conversation that came up with somebody on the product team recently about a power window switch and a customer having some confusions on that. And so I'm going to click on Windows and Glass. And so this gives all the different components or categories related to Windows and Glass. And so now if I click on Power Window Switch, Service and Repair, now it gives me all the different switches. So I'm looking at the driver, the main one here. And so click on that. Now it's going to show me how to remove the trim tabs here, unhook it, how to unbolt it, remove it from the trim bezel. And we see the entire process here. And now this kind of answers the question there. Does this have to be programmed? And so it does not appear to be. Usually on these, when you get to the end of it, it will say, go through control module replacement procedure with a scan tool or see programming instructions. And so that's good information to know. And that's something we all want to know before we even get into it. So if I change this and I go back to some other vehicles here and look on the side, this are just some of the vehicles I had worked on previously. If I pull up a 2007 GMC Yukon Denali, click on Windows and Glass, and kind of same thing. I'm going to click on power window switch, service information. So I'm going to do driver side switch. Same thing. Shows to go through here. So pretty straightforward. Does not look like programming is required. Now, let me quick go back to that newer truck a second. One thing I wanted to cover here before I get too far, and you'll notice why I'm going back to this new truck, and it wasn't on that '07. There's a ADAS quick reference over here in the upper right-hand side. And so if I click on that, this is very helpful if you're doing any type of work on these newer vehicles, you know, such as suspension or remove the front bumper. I do something to the front of the vehicle. For example, this particular truck that my friend is working on that has been in an accident, if the front bumper has to be replaced, well, there's some sensors in there. He needs to know, does it need to be recalibrated? So here we look, and we've got park assist sensors in the front bumper. It says calibration not required. Now in the rear, now there's blind spot warning and etc. Additional components there. If it's been removed and replaced, now there's a static calibration in which we need to use a scan tool, and then also the additional setups there. And so this ADAS quick reference is very helpful to understand, hey, before I touch this, do I have to do any additional work? And so you can see some stuff is calibration not required. Some of them, if you're going to remove the front grille here, because it's got the surround view camera, now you're going to be doing a dynamic calibration here with it. Got some other ones here with static, others with dynamic. Again, if you replace the seat, calibration not required, etc. So very helpful to understand. And that's found in the upper right-hand corner here at the ADAS quick reference guide. So now let's go into another situation here before I hand it over to Chris. And this is actually a vehicle he's working on diagnosing here. And this is a 2012 Audi Quattro. And the customer's concern is that the check engine light's on. It's been to actually two different shops, kind of getting thrown back and forth between it here. And so I said, hey, will you help us out here? So we're going to look up the trouble code here. So it's a P0 491 and 492. So I will continue scrolling all the way down here. And now if you're familiar with this VW Audi world, you understand that there's actually different codes other than the P codes here. But this is what we're going to focus on right now. And so if we click on that, you can see that this is basically a screenshot. I'm going to zoom in so we can kind of look here. So starting on the left-hand side, P0 491, air system insufficient flow bank 1. It also had a 492, which is for bank 2. Now it says check the secondary air system, refer to secondary air injection combination valve checking. And so we've got some information here, but not a whole lot, right? It doesn't really help us. What do we do? I don't know a whole lot about this system. And so what do we have to know here? Well, there is technical service bulletins if we look on the right-hand side here. So I'm going to click on that. And so we will scroll through and see if our trouble code is stored here. And I don't see anything about the secondary air system here or our particular code. So I'm going to back up from that. There is the all data find a fix area here. So I will click on that. And so we can see the code, the second system descriptor, probable causes. And if we look here, multiple options of things to do. So I really don't feel warm and fuzzy on this. This is where sometimes it's nice to have multiple repair sources. Now, as I mentioned, or if you're familiar with VW Audi or a lot of the Euro type platforms here, you know that they have different ways of doing the diagnostics. And a lot of it's actually based on the scan tool itself. And so you're going to go through and it's going to say, what is the reading on this? Yes or no? Or you put in the information and it's going to send you down a guided fault finding pathway. Well, so here's where it's beneficial again to have multiple sources of information. So I will go to Identifix here and look at the direct hit system here. And so I've already built the vehicle. And so I've got the 2012 Audi Q7, 3-liter gas. And so I'm going to type in my trouble code here. And actually, it's got both of them. So I'll click on that. And so here's the trouble codes: no drivability problems, potential causes, secondary air combination valve, plugged air control valve passes, defective air pressure sensor. So if we look at confirmed fixes here, 91 people who have called with this problem have called back and said, I had problems with the passageways. 26 said they had problems with secondary air passageways in the cylinder head. 19 said they had reaction pump problems. Well, so there's a lot of options here. I prefer not to even look at that side there. Where I'm going with this is if we click on this, they do a great job of giving us a diagnostic strategy here. And so it's going to tell you to disconnect the pressure line from the air pump to the combination valves, check for airflow when the pump is activated. Now, ideally, you're going to be doing this with a scan tool. Sometimes you might have to do it with a jumper lead, but we want to know, is there air pressure coming out of the pump there itself? Then it's going to tell us to reconnect the line, energize the pump, check for any air leaks, and walks through how to check the pressure here and how to basically understand if the combination valves are working, all the way up to basically the end result here being the potential for plugged passageways inside the cylinder head. And it's a very common problem with these, as you can tell there. So what I like with this is, yeah, it gives the confirmed fix, but it gives a better understanding of how to perform the tests here with us. So that's just one example of using multiple sources of different service information. I've yapped enough already, and Chris has a lot of probably even more relevant information here, as I know he's involved with us every day. So I'm going to turn it over to him. Thanks, Chris.
Thanks, Ryan, for the lead in to my portion of the video. And you already covered so much good information on the service information side of what it actually looks like to try to find some of these items in service information, whether it be any of our aftermarket sources like AllData, Mitchell, Identifix, anything like that, or even like you pointed out, where we actually have to go into factory service information to find some of the items if we can't find it in aftermarket service for various reasons. Or do we have to put a request in, like you kind of showed at the very beginning of your portion of the library request of what that looks like to, request something in service information. And so I kind of wanted to go back to the vehicle that you already pointed out of the Audi that we're diagnosing right now, the 2012 Audi Q7. And so I've got that vehicle loaded up on my screen as well. And a couple of key pieces of information that I just wanted to point out. You already did a really good job of showing what we've got as far as on the diagnostic side of what does it look like when we're looking for those trouble codes or the description of how does the system actually work. But let's say I want to do some more testing on that, and I want to get to individual components, and I want to look up wiring diagrams. So I'm going to click on diagrams on the left-hand side here. And we have a couple of options. We could either choose electrical OE, or we could do non-OE. And there's going to be a couple of different options with most of our aftermarket sources of which way we want our wiring diagram. If I go to the OE, now I've got all of my different systems. And so let's go back to powertrain management, kind of like you were already going through some of the sources here. And if I click on this, I'm just going to choose a diagram here. Doesn't matter. And you'll see how it shows tracks 1 through 14, 15 through 28. This is basically going through the list of all of their diagrams for each component. So I'm going to select one of these track groupings. And what I want to point out here is this diagram is going to look far different than anything that a lot of technicians are used to seeing if they're not familiar with European wiring diagrams. And this is a diagram that we call a track wiring diagram. And so at the bottom of the diagram, we're going to see what we call the track. And we have all of the numbers listed at the bottom. We have our grounds going to that. And what European makes do really well. So if we have like an Audi, for instance, here, you'll see that they don't necessarily have the wording of each component on here. They have a letter and a number associated with whatever component we're looking at. And above the diagram kind of gives us an idea of what's going to be included in there. But if we scroll down through the legend here, it tells us wiring color, which is going to be really important to understand because this is not necessarily going off of the English word of SW is black, WS is white. So you can see how this isn't WH or something like that for white, BL for black, it's SW and RO for red. So this is coming from the European side and kind of getting translated over for us. So something to be a word of caution for us when we're looking at wire colors. And as we scroll down, like I mentioned, we have components listed in a letter and number form. So for instance, the airbag control module is J234 here. And one thing that's nice is once we actually understand this terminology across these makes, it's always going to be that. And so whatever that number is, when we become familiar with that, with our track diagrams, that number is going to be that component. And it makes it really streamlined process once we go through it. So yes, it is an adjustment from what a lot of us are used to seeing if we're not that familiar with European. However, once we get the hold of it, of what that layout looks like. For instance, you can kind of see too at the top of this diagram, when I scrolled back up, we've got our power sources up there. We've got our fuses. If I want to find out what SD1 is, I can scroll down. SD1 is fuse 1 on fuse panel D. I can click on the fuses components overview, and it will actually tell me where this is located on the vehicle. And this is testing that I did on here as well, was testing these different fuses, making sure I've got power to that air pump, and then I can test for power and ground. Now, to the point that you were making on Identifix as well. So I've got the vehicle loaded on Identifix, and we're kind of on the same page of I like to look at it and see, okay, I already read the information as to why does this trouble code set in all data and how does it set? How is it being monitored by the module? And I'm going to look at the steps that someone created on this test plan for the trouble codes here. And I'm going to see if it's something I want to do. So not necessarily just look at it and go, okay, 100 people had this problem. This has got to be the issue. But if it's a really fast test and it seems feasible to do, well, I'm going to do that then. And so for here, I can read through it, see if the test is valid. And what we're really looking for is on that trouble code, it's looking for a pressure change through the secondary air system. And it's using the pressure sensor to do that. And it's turning on the pump. So I can do a lot of these things already. And I'm going to command that pump on with a scan tool. I'm going to verify that it can output air from the secondary air injection pump. If I check that all out, I've already verified a lot of things. I know my power and ground are good, or I can also monitor that air pressure sensor on the system also to see if maybe my point of reference is faulty and that's why it's not seeing the change. So either way, this gives me a lot of good base steps to kind of go off of when looking over that system on there. Now, talking about wiring diagrams, you already covered a great deal of information as to just navigating service information and what it looks like to, find description and operation, trouble code setting. How do I go from this point to this point? Or, when we're replacing a component, are we aware of some of the ADAS things on there? One other thing we may run into is for the wiring diagram side. Let's say we're on this 2010 Ford F-150. So it's kind of an older vehicle. This should be something that's kind of fully loaded into any information system at this point. I'm going to click on wiring diagrams. And let's say I go to the OE side. So we can really click anything on here, but I'll just go back to powertrain management. We've already been going through that in other instances. And what I want to point out here is in the OE diagram, we're going to see we have kind of blue hyperlinks all throughout this wiring diagram. And if you've gone to the OE side, so if we were in Ford service information and we pulled up this wiring diagram, every time we click on one of those blue hyperlinks, this will bring us right to that piece of information. So whether it be a connector, a wire, a description as to what that thing is. So all of these hyperlinks mean something, they're clickable and you can get there. Well, that's not always the case on the aftermarket side. So here, if I click on the wiring diagram, and now I should be able to click on these blue hyperlinks. On this instance, because the vehicle's older and it is loaded, this is exactly what I find. Connector 112, it actually links to it. And now I can find the various pieces of information for that connector. So I can look at the connector face. And here it lists all of the information all off of that hyperlink. Now, sometimes these hyperlinks are not actually clickable, or they won't actually source you to the right spot. And what I want to point out there is sometimes we are going to have to go to OEM service information, or we may have to put in a request to our information source, whether it be Mitchell ALLDATA, Identifix, anything like that, where we may have to say, hey, I was on this wiring diagram. I'm trying to find out this piece of information from the hyperlink, and it's not linking me over to it. And they will give us the service information for that piece of information. So again, these are really great pieces of information from the wiring diagrams that I can click on different things. Here's a great example right here. I just clicked on 24.3 and it says the article is not found. So in this instance here, this would be something where I'm going to have to actually put a request in for that link, or I'm going to have to purchase a short-term subscription to OEM service information in order to find out, what that piece of information is that I'm looking for. So with everything that Ryan covered already, I think he did a great job of going through so many different things of understanding exactly how description and operation is and what the trouble code setting criteria is. So once we have a trouble code, we've pulled it, we know how to actually access that, find all of the information behind it. And to his point, on the right-hand side of the screen, this is one of the big things that I click on first when I'm trying to figure out how to diagnose something. And I may go to description and operation. And then I can actually figure out what's going on with that various system or component. So let's say we go to sensors and switches, and I may go to the coolant temperature sensor. If there is any supporting information to this system, sensor, anything like that, there's going to be another tab on the right-hand side, and it will actually say description and operation. And I'll have a lot of supporting information there for me to actually diagnose that system a little further and understand why it sets codes, how it operates, how it monitors it, and what I've got to do to verify that I've actually repaired something properly. And so if there is further information on that portion of the vehicle, it's going to be found in this description and operation portion. And again, this is going to be under each different system. So I'm going to go to powertrain management, restraints and safety systems. Anything I'm trying to find, I'm going to go over to description and operation and try to read up on exactly how that operates on there. So with that, this kind of concludes a little bit of our screen sharing portion of it, where we've tried to really walk you through a lot of things on screen right now.
All right. Well, thanks, Chris. That was a lot of information, and I thought I had it figured out. I even learned some more here. You can teach an old dog some new tricks. So we've covered a lot. Understand that there's multiple sources we need here, and there's maybe even some holes yet, but we got to look at some of this stuff. So, Corey, I've seen a lot of questions come through. Let's go over a couple of your favorites here.
Yeah, and actually I had one that came through that actually just touched on what you were talking about, multiple sources. So have you run into a situation where the information you need just isn't there? So then what? What's the solution?
Phone a friend, right? Okay. I think that's the best part. But Chris, I'll let you take this one.
Yeah, sure. So we definitely do run into that scenario. And especially if we're working at an independent shop or something like that, where we may have an aftermarket source. And so we may run into the scenario where we don't have the information needed at that time for a newer vehicle, something like that. And if we run into that, then we may have to, use a library request, or we actually have to go to the manufacturer that supplies that information and get it from there too. So there's multiple different ways we could do that.
Yeah. So to reiterate, do the library request. I think you covered that a little bit in your presentation. I've never had to do it, but I've heard great results of people getting quick callbacks with all that stuff. But again, I think that's where it's important to have access to multiple sources, and especially the OE sites, right? I mean, in my history, I've had to go to the OE sites many times just to kind of plug in something. Or we were working on a case study a year ago, remember, and I went through a test like YY or something. Yes. We needed YZ.
Right.
It was cut off, and so we had to find that later on.
Yep.
All right. And here's another one, guys, and I know this is one a lot of people are going to want to know the answer to. Have you ever run into the links on a wiring diagram not functioning with the aftermarket service information?
Yeah, absolutely. So that's something that I've run into actually fairly frequently if we're working on a newer vehicle where maybe not everything is there with aftermarket yet. So you look at a wiring diagram and it may look OE even because they may have taken it from there, something like that. And we have the links there, but then we go to click on it and we actually can't access that link for whatever reason. That would be a scenario where oftentimes I'm going to have to do one of those requests, or I'll have to actually go to that OE manufacturer, do a short-term subscription, something like that with them.
Yeah, because I think a lot of these aftermarket programs, they're doing their best, right? They're adding all this stuff to it, but they might put the piece, but then they haven't got around to uploading the next piece yet with it. So we definitely run into those scenarios.
I got another one here because I'm sure everybody's got their favorites, but which source of information is your favorite? What do you guys prefer?
Hey, we love all of our children the same, and so the same with all of our information sources here. So there's no one size fits all, in my opinion. And so you've seen some examples here where we might have to go to multiple sources. A lot of it depends on familiarity, right? We've used all data here because that's what we've been using the longest with this stuff. But, Mitchell, MotoLogic, additional sources out there have great information as well. So it's what you're familiar with. And, sometimes you got to just spend that extra time digging through and scraping through a couple different levels to find the information you're looking for.
Yep. All right. Well, in the spirit of time, I'm going to throw one more at you, but I'm actually going to combine two different questions we have here. How regularly are these updated, and how new of a vehicle is covered? I kind of feel like those go hand in hand.
Yeah, definitely. I don't have a spec on they update it, but they all have teams of people working, and that's the benefit of today's internet-based service information, right? It's constantly being updated, and so latest technical service bulletins, I feel really comfortable with that. Again, they've all got teams of people doing this. Much better than the days of you purchase a book once a year, or you buy the discs and quarterly you update it. Something might have been missing yesterday and you go find it today, or Chris called the library and they said, oh, we got to add that.
Yeah.
And then they put it on that afternoon or something.
Right.
So
that's a great point. when we put those requests in, well, all of a sudden that gets addressed. So the more often something like that happens or a common fault, well, then that information is going to be there a little bit sooner too.
Excellent. Well, hopefully now you have a better understanding of multiple opportunities and multiple reasons why you need to have service information at your fingertips. All your technicians should have easy access to it. And it's important to just continue to look and find out what's new there. Click on some links and keep discovering. So on behalf of all of us here at Standard Motor Products, we appreciate you tuning in today. We look forward to seeing you again next month.